Hello, everyone. I am here with Michael Watson from Hedgineer, and Michael is going to tell us. And this is an AI story wrapped into a hedge fund background, wrapped into a bunch of other things. So I want Michael to explain to us exactly a little bit of his background and what is this Hedgineer all about.
Awesome. Professor Zorro, great to meet you. I think what's interesting how we got connected. So I've run a company called Hedgineer and we deploy out AI systems and asset managers and hedge funds. I spent the majority of my career at Citadel before that. But I also have a podcast called the Hedgineer Podcast where we talk about technology, data, and AI. And I was setting up a couple of my Claude agents to start doing some more marketing and sales for me. I gave one of them access to the Raphonic API key. It's basically they do a lot of like similarity analysis of podcasts. They can compare each other, can find similar podcasts, can do like niche analysis of like what's a similar podcast to mine that has a similar following. Um, Send me their contact email, and then I connected that to my email agent, and I had it send you an email. So like, oh, you have a similar podcast to mine. You should um, have me on one of your episodes. And then you replied and you sent me this invite. And then like we're 5 minutes into the call and we're already recording this podcast. So like this is I like how it's moving quickly. When you're building a startup, you have to move fast. But yeah, appreciate the intro. Like I said, we do AI implementations for asset managers and hedge funds, primarily our discretionary managers. We're part of the Claude ecosystem, and we primarily do Claude enterprise deployments. Um, and we get to see what it's like when you deploy within the enterprise for an asset manager or hedge fund, what works, what doesn't, and how you can try to like alleviate some of the initial stumbling blocks that firms have when they roll out AI, and try to get to like what's the actual value add, what are the workflows, what's the the main unlock in order to make AI more effective within a fund.
What does it mean exactly? Make AI more acceptable to the fund. What
Effective?
do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So one how do you like it allows AI to be able to do the workflows that you would imagine it would be capable of doing in order for all of this excitement, enthusiasm to be justified. So, how do you go into earnings season and have all of the summarization of what the management team's talking about, have an updated model that currently that correctly breaks down the company's segmentation, um, that gives you full understanding of what guidance was for the last quarter, what's consensus for the fundamentals of the company, what's your expectation for the management team. Um, at your fingertips with you not having to do any work. AI just makes that magically all available for you. Right now, a lot of analysts have to spend a lot of time in order to gather all that information, synthesize it, kind of get it ready. Um, and AI, ideally, for at least a fundamental equity analyst, it would just make all that magically accessible. And when it can't do that, when it's actually struggling to be able to help you organize and structure your research, for example, going into earnings, that's an example of AI not being effective. And so now that we have that as an example, how do we help clients accomplish that? One is to make sure that like their AI deployment, AI sessions all have access to the data that they need for a given workflow. So, for example, if, like let's say a workflow is preparing for an earnings call, you want to make sure that you have your models correctly updated. They represent the fundamentals of the company. How do you have access to the underlying fundamentals of the company? So, like you need to get a connector for that. Let's say an MCP server connected to a Visible Alpha MCP server or a Delupa MCP server. You then have specific ways that you think about that company. And so you might have a skill to be able to translate that data into a model that represents that company for you. You then might want to have access to what the management team has historically been talking about, at least in the last earnings call. so that you can know what their guidance is for this upcoming quarter. So for that, something that you might have access to is either transcripts or something like ARIA. They can give you that historical transcript. You then might want to be reading through like the K's and Q's to understand what the company was primarily talking about within the revenue segments that matter. There's connectors that wrap on top of Edgar. So if you have, let's say, those four different connectors, that allows you to be able to have access to fundamentals, it allows you access to consensus, it has you access to actual transcripts, and then it gives you access to the reported like data from the firm. So that's just raw data. So that's step one, making sure that the data that you need access to is available within Claude. The next element is being able to have taste to describe what you need that information to be transformed into so that it's available to you in the format that makes most sense. And so is that in the format of a memo that you want going into earnings call? Is the format of a combination of Excel models? And so that's where you do these transformations, oftentimes in the form of skills. And then you need users that are trained and understand how to use all of this information, so that they do get that experience where whenever they go into earnings season for every name within their coverage, all of the research has been summarized, all the data is accessible. They're fully prepared in order to react to any changes that are happening within earnings and leaning on AI to do a lot of that. And so like that's an example for a fundamental researcher, what an effective use of AI looks like. And a lot of that is just when we go in and we help a client, it's just piecing together things that oftentimes they kind of know what to do. Um, and being that last mile. And you can do most of that right now with a Anthropic license or with a chat GPT or enterprise license and access to the underlying data sources. And then you can do the rest yourself with well thought out skills. There are other options out there like Perplexity Computer, but we primarily help clients be successful within that um, chat GPT and Anthropic enterprise deployment. The next element that's actually really powerful, not to go on for a little bit too long, is when users start using AI within a firm, they produce a lot of exhaust data. So, like every prompt that a user puts in when they're preparing for an earnings call and they're pulling in data, maybe from a Visible Alpha or from Bloomberg, they're then transforming it. The model is responding, it's calling out to some of these tools. All of that data represents the exact path that happened when a user was interacting with AI to produce a piece of work. And there's very few organizations or firms that actually go and review that. But when you actually go and can start like reviewing session by session across a team, across an organization, you can start identifying like, oh, this is the things that we're not using AI effectively for. For example, we're trying to join Bloomberg and S&P data together, and it's obviously not working for some reason that'll be apparent when you see like the errors that happen within the logs. You can then go and start fixing that by either a skill or a better connector. And so starting to have a process to review the way in which AI is using or being used within an investment workflow is part of like the operational AI kind of like role that's starting to like exist within asset managers and funds where there's people that are responsible for reviewing the efficacy of AI by looking at how all the different analysts or people within risk or operations, portfolio managers, even investor relations, accounting, treasury management are using AI, identifying what's not working, and then being responsible for solving that. And you do that by having a central repository of all the AI usage within the business and then start mining through it. Oftentimes you find like three categories of things to improve. One is that you can identify how the user should have been prompting the system better. They're oftentimes not being as thoughtful or explicit in what they're trying to accomplish. Two, better access to data. So either the existing MCP servers, the way that the AI tool is accessing data, the underlying data is incorrect, or they doesn't actually have the necessary data to solve a problem. Might be going out and doing a web search. You want to avoid that. And third is better system prompts or skills that is available to the model when it's going to make decisions on behalf of a user. And so if you can then, when you identify an issue, you can triage it and categorize into one of those three things: user error, data error, skill error. It makes it more actionable in order to know what to do next to start allowing AI to be something that's continuously improving within the organization and having the tools in a framework in order to do that. And that's what we help clients do. That's how we help funds get better and more effective with deploying AI.
Okay, couple of questions. The first one is, so it looks like you have a custom API that you kind of sell out as a product, or is it really, or do you also, or do you have a standard product that you have and you say, here, if you want to access all your 10Ks, your 10Qs, the moment it
No,
gets
no, we
published,
don't
or
do that. No.
okay.
So what we do is we install kind of one we do the hard work of deploying all of our software within our clients' clouds. So a traditional way that you would deploy software is that you would have one server and you would have one API, and all of your different customers would connect to that one API. And that's how we've traditionally thought about software. Um, how we approach what we do is we actually have a standard software stack, but we redeploy that into each one of our clients' clouds that we then administer for them. By client cloud, I mean like an Azure, AWS, GCP environment. And the benefit of that is that all the data that they put into that system never leaves their tenant, their cloud environment. So there's more information security than if we have one API and they send all of their data to us. So we like to say like we ship our software and people to you instead of you shipping your data to us so that you can feel comfortable keeping all of your data there because that's where there's a lot of these big unlocks with data. So just to clarify that we deploy our software within their environment. Um, and there's four components of it. One is for the agent management framework. So like when you deploy and run agents within your cloud, this is the system that would run those agents. The second is the analytics layer that captures all of the AI usage across your firm. It gets routed to a storage path in your environment that then we can mine. The third is the MCP layer for how you can access a lot of this data, or you can create MCP servers for third-party data sources that don't exist. And the fourth is a skill library that we've pre-curated that we can deploy into the clients, either ChatGPT Enterprise or Anthropic or Claude Enterprise systems that allows them to get bootstrapped with skills right away, but then we partner with them on customizing those skills over time.
Well, obviously, if you're working with a hedge fund, they want to make sure that whatever you're working stays in house, and
Yeah, but there's
for
it's kind
obvious
of
reason.
interesting, right? Like there's some things that people don't care. They almost want to not have to own themselves. Like if you're dealing for many firms, they don't want to be responsible for doing post-trade reconciliation as their secret sauce. They don't want to know about how you connect to Bloomberg SAPI as their secret sauce. They don't oftentimes want to know like how you might do a like basic earnings preview template as their secret sauce. So having a firm that can come in and do all of that for them, where there's different workflows that they define as beta, is something they get to move off of their balance sheet onto a third party and essentially buy it. So before you would think about buy versus build in the form of technology, with the role of AI, it's almost buy versus build in the form of services, in the form of like capabilities. So if you, for example, want to go and build all of your fundamental models when you start initiating coverage for a name, do you think that that's alpha? Or are you doing that for just a prerequisite and it's beta? Now, some firms will like a former employer would say for me, they would say like, oh, I always want our analysts to build their models from scratch when they start because that's a part of their intellectual um, building and in their intellectual like path of making sure they understand the name by forcing you to build the model yourself. Whereas others are like, hey, that is just a means to an end. I don't need to have us be the one that necessarily builds the model. I want to decide what to do after that. And so in many of these cases, those are examples where firms are comfortable just buying beta and having us do that, and then making sure that where they do have alpha, like the specifics way they may interpret a model or they want to construct a portfolio or they think about research, that's specific to them. Like that's something that they always own, and we make sure that's not shared. But I think that there's a lot of workflows within the industry, which oftentimes people think of as like secretive, that in actuality are not. And most funds don't think are secretive themselves. Um, I think also there's an element of the big firms tend to be like the most kind of, I guess, secretive and IP constrictive or IP restrictive, whereas the majority of firms out there, like the research process is maybe a little IP restrictive, but there's a lot more leniency in being able to like hand off other parts of their workflow now as it pertains to AI, where the firm knows good and well that they do not have alpha in a certain process, and they oftentimes are losing money by being below what beta is. Um,
What
if
about?
that if that's helpful for
Yeah,
context.
no. Okay, I got that part. Okay. So now the second question is, you mentioned Claude. So what is it about Claude? Are you a Claude shop or a ChatGPT? What and
Yeah, I mean, we've
why?
historically been very tightly coupled to Claude. I think that what they did when they came out with Claude Code is build an ecosystem that was consistent across all of their products. And so Claude Code and Cowork, and even Claude Chat, Claude Code for desktop, all would wrap small pieces of Claude Code's agentic loop in those other products. And so if you wanted to modify the agentic loop by adding in a skill, you could deploy a skill in one place and have it be distributed across every user in the organization, whether they're on Claude Code or Claude Cowork or Claude Chat, very easily. So it was Claude is like for me personally, it was great because um a they had a framework that was more cohesive and structured than anyone else out there. Now, I think that most other, like a ChatGPT, for example, is caught up a ton in what they've done with Codex. And now they have the Codex desktop app, and they have the same way for delivering skills and agents through Codex. That's at this point pretty much on parity with Claude Code, even though it doesn't quite have the mind share. But up until like a couple months ago, it was very clear that Anthropic was leading the way with all of the different features and functionality you would want for deploying out AI. Um, but the OpenAI is pretty closely kind of caught up to that, but we're just still leaning more towards Claude,
Hmm.
just because they have so much momentum in the enterprise at the moment. I don't think that that's necessarily going to hold true for another 2 or 3 quarters. Um, but they definitely have a lot more momentum at the moment. But also a lot of things that we build, they're universal. Like an MCP server has nothing to do with Claude, nor does it have anything to do with OpenAI. It's an industry standard. The concept of skills, again, industry standard. You build a skill for OpenAI, it also works for Claude. Um, the way that you think about the agent harness, the way that you run manage agents. Now, there's different frameworks when you want to run an agent um, that can be model agnostic. So something like ADK from Google, you can choose the model that you want. Other agent frameworks like obviously OpenClaw is an agent framework that's also somewhat model agnostic. Although that's almost like an agent framework of agent frameworks. I could go into some of like the things that are kind of unique about OpenClaw. But then there are non-model agnostic agent frameworks like Anthropic's managed agent framework, where they're tightly coupled to the Anthropic Claude models as well as the runtime and in the functionality and features that you have there. So we do tend to do more right now with the Anthropic managed agent framework, but that's one area where you start getting coupling. If you start relying on one managed agent framework, skills and MCP, not quite so much. And then the observability and telemetry layer of what we do, of how you observe everything that AI is doing within a firm. Um, we do integrate with Cursor as well as Claude. They both have what's called OTel connectors. OTel is short for Open Telemetry. It's a way that you can get traces of different distributed systems routing their logs to one place. Um, and so we natively do integrate with the the Claude Hotel system, but the same thing works with ChatGPT. There is then like the hooks in the plugin ecosystem that exists for Claude that is not perfectly compatible with Codex. So, for example, with when you go and run like a Claude Code session, there's a life cycle to it. There's like session starts, user submits prompt, uh, tool gets called, skill gets called, system replies with prompt, um, session ends. And so each one of those steps within a Claude Code session, you can use hooks for to do certain checks, data quality checks, logging checks, um, and we do have a lot around the Claude code lifecycle. That same thing is also shared within Cowork, which is actually pretty convenient. They're really the same thing. And ultimately Claude Code and Claude Cowork will merge into a single product in the next 12 to 18 months. Um, but yeah, we do quite a bit with the Claude Code plugin ecosystem.
Great.
Um, yeah,
So let's pull up away from the nitty gritty of the day to day. I wanted to get a feel from you as to, so what do you think? I mean, you are obviously a heavy user of it and you are making great use of it. So the question is this, where do you see the jobs? Where do you see the opportunities with AI implementation, right? Because obviously what you're doing now, it would have taken, I don't know, 50 people to go out and produce that for the hedge funds. But now you do it probably with a lot less people and a lot much faster. So where do you see this thing going since they're all catching up and keep doing more and more and more and more? Where
I
does this
think
go?
so I guess there's a couple different ways that I would take that. One is um I can't necessarily say exactly where it's going right now, but what I can say is that the opportunity that exists for people that are taking advantage of the capabilities right now have been um better than they ever have been before. Like I don't know how much of your audience is students, but the ability for a student to really understand how these tools work, understand the nuances of language as it pertains to how language models interpret language, what an MCP server is, what an agent harness is, um, how you can write a skill, how you can orchestrate a workflow, how you evaluate whether or not that workflow is successful, how you produce information, insight, work product in a consistent way. That's an incredibly valuable skill right now, and there is no moat to obtaining that skill. There is no degree that you need. If somebody has a degree in that, I'm honestly skeptical of it because there's no way that a curriculum could keep up with the pace of innovation right now. And so the real skills, the ones that you can't learn in the classroom, and that those are the types of skills in which the barrier of entry are incredibly low. So anyone right now can go on YouTube, can try to really understand a domain, figure out how to use these tools very effectively, and immediately have an incredibly marketable skill for organizations that are desperate to not fall behind with AI. And so if it pertains to like opportunities versus risks, I think that the opportunities have never been better for people that are leaning into this and understanding that can articulate how to use these tools and then put themselves into domains where they're the first person that's ever worked at a company that really understands how to use AI effectively in um, fund accounting or in treasury management or in data cleaning or in marketing or in um, uh, doing like research preparation or being a research assistant, being a fundamental analyst. Just having these skills is so rare and the demand for them are so high and the barrier of acquiring these skills are so low. The opportunity is it's just incredibly ripe. And there's a huge arbitrage from um, the human beings that can and can't. That like that's where the big arbitrage at this moment is. And I do think that that arbitrage is not going away. Like the pace of innovation is only going to continue to accelerate. And so this state is not a temporary state. This is something that you need to get comfortable always being in this state of disruption and information and skill arbitrage. Because the what we're talking about right now is going to be common knowledge in 6 to 12 months. We'll look back on what I'm saying like, oh wow, Michael sounds pretty foolish in the way that he was describing these things relative to what we know now. And so 12 months from now, I'm going to have to no longer be at the state that I am of understanding of how to use these tools where I'm today. I have to be that much better 12 months from now. But I am certain, and if I'm that much better at understanding how to use these tools, deploying them within an asset manager, deploying them within a fund, evaluating, demonstrating that it's as effective as it's going to be, that my opportunities will be even that much more in 12 months from now. And then the same thing is likely going to be true 12 months after that, and 12 months after that, and 12 months after that. But at no point in time do I have a baseline moat of capabilities that I feel are not disruptable based off of what's going to happen 12 months from then. And so the and I do feel like this is like the natural state of things. Like this is the natural state that I think humans have always survived within and thrived within, where there was never a guarantee that 2 years from now you have safety, you have perfect health, you have an abundance of resources, your job is safe, the harvest is going to be great. There's not going to be a major conflict between you and other tribes or villages or countries. There's not going to be another major epidemic or health issue. There's not going to be some like uh, uh, major conflict that disrupts my life. Like that would like the day-to-day struggle is something that I think humanity has always had to persist within. And then for a long period of time, we had this level of comfort, Pax Americana. We had this massive industrialization and this world of abundance where you were always just comfortable. And I think that now we're going back to a state where I think is more native to how like most of human civilization has existed within, where there isn't always a guarantee and so in safety net for your career, your capabilities, like your livelihood 12 months down the line. It's like you need to hustle and survive and put food on the table for you right now and always keep up to date and protect that. And so I think that the element of it's no longer safe. We're all no longer safe is actually a more natural state for us to be able to survive in, and is actually quite healthy, although it's a relatively inconvenience compared to being able to guaranteed like I don't know high five figure, close to six-figure job after a couple years working on Wall Street, work for like I don't know, 30 years, get a nice retirement, 401k, down payment on your job, hunky dory, you go into retirement, it's all good, you're never hungry. Like I don't know, like I think that was nice while it lasted, but that was a very blink period, like a blink in terms of human history that we had that. And it's not like that's not the case, right? But like this sense of anxiety and lack of uncertainty, um, I don't know. I think we got a little spoiled for a while, and maybe humanity needed some kind of kick in the ass to realize, like, hey, like you had it very easy for a while. It's not going to be the case anymore. And I think people should be embracing that.
And that's exactly, I like what you said about the curriculum. And that's exactly the way I run my program is that we did LLM projects 3 years ago, and we still within the curriculum universities are not catching up fast enough. And with Claude and AI, and it's just there's no way you could put these things together, hire the right people in the right place to get the students ready. And that's the reason why half of the time my students spend time on projects with outside firm working on stuff that frankly is not offered in the curriculum. But you're right. I agree with you. It is unsettling because they say, well, hold on, you're asking me to work on, we did this thing for math lab, I think 2, 3 years ago and say, okay, work on these large language models. And the students is the what? Well, okay, and you're right. Here's a YouTube video. Here's a couple of books. Catch up, and then when you're ready, you come. And that's exactly what they did. And we didn't have to spend a bunch of semesters after semesters. But again, you're right. It is not a very comfortable place to be, and it requires certain people to be able to say, because and they're telling me right now, as they're interviewing for positions, they're asking them exactly what you're telling me now, which is the stuff that doesn't exist yet. They say, how could I interview on a job that I don't know exists yet? And how do they know I'm going to be able to do that job? Well, you have to show some sort of resolve. Well, this is quite
100%.
interesting. That's
Yeah,
exactly what.
100%. Like, and you're right on. Like the curriculums, and it's tough, right? Like I'm empathetic for students in classrooms where they're forced to study to keep up a GPA, and a lot of stuff is timeless. Like I do think a lot of the stuff that you're going to teach is timeless, but there are elements of curriculums do not have a framework to keep up with the pace of innovation, especially as it pertains to AI. That even teaching a course on AI, especially applied AI, it's it's almost like it's kind of failed from the start. No, but there are concepts though. Like I like to take the other side. There are fundamental concepts of realizing when I'm talking about a skill or an MCP server or a tool call or memory, all they are different ways that you can go and copy and paste text and send it to a prompt. Um, and I was talking to I did a training today, like a $50 billion asset manager to all of their IR team, and we were discussing what's the difference between a skill in project knowledge and project memory, what I'm typing in the prompt, the context from an MCP call. And I said, ultimately, there's no difference. All they are different ways to allow Claude to be able to copy and paste text from one place to another in different points when it's convenient to do that. And realizing that that's all that's happening underneath the hood is that there's a language model that has gradient descent in the transformer model that gets tokens in and then does transformations and sends tokens out. And that's it. And so any of these abstractions that we have at that first part of skills or memory or tool calling, they're just different ways that we can assemble tokens optimally. And all those tokens are text. And all that text is just being pieced together of primarily just English language. And so all these like complicated things, it's just different ways that you can allow a language model to copy and paste text, put it together for the optimal prompt, and then send it over to the language model that does all of its magic. And honestly, you don't even need to know what that magic is. Like that's a black box to you. Honestly, it's fine. But then you have to know what's the optimal way to be able to assemble those tokens on the front end to be able to do that smart copying and pasting. And then you realize like, oh, there's different patterns, there's different techniques. Those techniques are oftentimes pasting tokens together that represent a workflow or a process or a concept that if you understand that concept for fundamentals and you realize that all of the token engineering and context engineering is smart copying and pasting, you then can say, oh, well, if I want to be able to run a mean reversion algorithm and test out 100 different variations of that and have AI do a lot of that for me, I just need to be able to allow the description of that process and some code examples to be able to be copy and pasted intelligently to a language model. A language model then can just follow the process and do the very next step. Um, and making sure
Hmm.
that people understand that I think is important. I think basic understanding of the agentic loop, what is an agent harness? I think that that has many different representations across different ways that AI is being used in practice. But I do think that like understanding some of those basic concepts is important. But outside of that, it's about experimentation. It's about like looking at it and following interesting stuff that's happening live on X, happening live on YouTube.
So let's take it home by talking a little bit about you. What's your background? Are you
Sure.
computer science background, or are you on a Math
A little
background?
bit. So like I in school I did Chinese and economics, and a lot of math. And then the big benefit for me is that my freshman year, we switched over from doing comp sci or introduction to computer science from C++ to Python. And this would have been, I think, 2006 as an experimentation. And I got red pilled in Python right away. Um, and I started just living and breathing everything about Python. And it was at an early stage, like around then when I think it was maybe, I don't know, Python 2.4, 2.3. And there were like all these new frameworks coming out, like NumPy a little bit later on, and then pandas, and then you could build web applications with Cherry Pie and Bottle, and then Flask came out and Django was around for a while. Some things that were really cool early on in my career is I did a lot of work on Windows, and there was this library called Win32com that could allow you to hook into Excel in really cool ways. My first job out of school was at a company called JD Power Associates. Wasn't super sexy, wasn't that exciting, and it was not a tech company. And I think that was the biggest advantage for me because I was the only person I think in the company that could write Python at a non-tech organization that had tons of data in Excel. And so I started just living and breathing, writing code. I started sharing programs with my friends or my coworkers. They started using them. For everyone, it was magic. Management started recognizing me within the company. Who is this kid writing these programs that like they're sharing across the company?
Yeah.
And then I got to be put on the Skunkworks team that was responsible for rethinking the research platform of the company after like I was there for 4 or 5 years. I started going to doing a lot of talks in the Python community. I had this one talk that I would do really well was how to become the office genius in Python when no one else knows how to code. And then I did it at Pi Ohio, Pi Data, PyCon, Pi Tennessee, and started getting a lot of like really good receptive feedback. And then some recruiters reached out to me and they said, "Hey, like if you want, like there's a huge demand for this." And then I was like, "Yeah, I never really at that point considered myself a software engineer. All of my 20s, all I would talk about was Python. If I was at a party, I would just talk about like these cool new libraries. People would tell me to stop talking about it. I was obsessed, but because I didn't study comp sci in the back of my
Mhm.
mind, I was never a programmer. It just I missed the boat on that. Oh well, that sucks. Um, and but then they're like, hey, you should like let me just put some interviews in front of you. And so then I ended up getting an offer at Facebook and Google. And then I was deciding between them. I was like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. And my recruiter asked me, I think I was like 26 years old. Um, have you heard of? And I said, yeah, like I'm familiar with them. They weren't nearly, this is like 2000, I think 13, 2014. Um, because I studied finance. I was on like the Fed challenge team. I went really deep in monetary policy. Working at a company like Citadel, that wasn't on the cards for me. I went to Michigan State, great school. I'm on the board of the economics now. I now have like an endowment in the school in my name where I have an award for students that I feel like kind of fit that mold that I was in. But I was like, yeah, Citadel would be sweet, but like that's not really sure, yeah, I'll talk to them. And then they flew me out to Chicago. And they're like, hey, like we don't do a lot of Python, a lot of stuff in C, C++, C sharp. We want to do more Python, and like we think you're the guy that could help us do that. We could take a shot on it. And I then was one of the first Python developers there, at least in the equity space. And then I grinded for the next decade. Was like an individual developer working on our risk system, started to understand that a little bit better. Um, Started to understand a lot around how we were using data, built out like a system called the data catalog. And then started running like data alternative data started getting really popular as well. So the way that credit card data, claims data, was like starting to get whispers in the organization. And so like the fundamental teams wanted this and they would need engineers that could help them do it. And there wasn't really a dedicated team for it. So I started getting pulled onto like some of these special projects, and then we started hiring a bunch of data engineers, and I started like running the data engineering team and getting really deep into the role of a lot of alternative data. And then we started having to do a lot of work in the Hong Kong organization, is building that out. So then I ended up running this engineering team in Hong Kong, and then an opportunity came like after I've been there like 6, 7, 8 years to run the enterprise data team for Citadel, the hedge fund, and Citadel Securities. And like, oh, that sounds great. So then I started running their security master. Now there's like all these different teams. And then I got the opportunity to run all of the equities technology for Citadel, like global equity, Surveyor Capital, Ashler Capital, international equities. And I kind of like wrote a lot of really cool waves during like that time there. Like one, Python was this amazing kind of wave that I rode from like the mid 2000s, kind of even to today, right? Like it still has such a stronghold on um being it's the best, it's the second best programming language for every problem. And so it's so diverse. I can use it for doing hard data science. I can use it for training language models, at least with wrappers and PyTorch. I can use it for hosting web services, for managing infrastructure, um, with things like Puppet. I can use it for building application. There's just so many use cases for it, and I've been just living and breathing that for so long. So I wrote that way. The other way was like, I don't know, like I didn't realize Citadel was going to be as wildly successful. I mean, they were for their entire trajectory, but if you look at where they were when I think I joined in 2014 to where they are today, at least when it comes to technology, they were always the forefront. But it's a night and day. It's a totally different world, and so I got to, from my perspective, ride these two waves of picking the right technology, making a bet on it, and picking a firm that was awesome. Like I had an absolute blast, and it was a pedagogical experience that like I don't think I could have found a better place to learn about a craft better than that. That ultimately put me in a position in like 22, 23, where my dad built companies, and I wanted to build companies, and so I left to kind of build my own thing. And so now I'm running Hedgineer, and we're growing, and we're doing a lot of great work with deploying AI and data within many different asset managers, most in New York, not all of them. And where this journey goes from here, I'm not sure. But then there's this whole AI wave, and like I said, like I feel as though like I have to be just as desperate as a college graduate to make sure that I don't fall behind.
Yeah.
And there are other people, like I'm competing in the same way that they are. Like I'm not safe, they're not safe.
Yeah.
We're all, I guess, in this together in some way, but we're all competing in the jungle without any guarantee of a safety net behind us. And I think if I can embrace it, if you can embrace it, then
Mm.
it's something that everyone should be able to embrace. And I think
I like the philosophy of it. That's quite. I mean, I hope that. I mean, Edgeny, I'm sure is doing is something interesting. But you as a character, I mean, I hope that they realize that. I mean, they have a great opportunity. People working alongside of you. I mean, the wealth. I mean, just in what you told me in maybe not even 30 minutes, there's a lot to your character there, which I think is amazing. And yeah, someone like you I have students like that. In fact, I have a student that I said, "So, are you going to look for a job?" He says, "Well, I was looking at Calci, and I was building my own algorithm, and maybe I want to do my own. Maybe I could make money doing this." So now, more and more, I think students, certain people they need to be on their own because it's just the room is too small for them. So
Mhm.
that's great. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I want to thank you, and I'm definitely going to have you back for other discussions because you touched on so many topics. But I wanted to, Michael, I wanted to thank you for your time. This was very, very educational from a business creation point of view, but also educational. I think you brought some interesting aspects, and of course, AI since everyone has to talk about AI. But thank you very much for your time there.
Yeah, Professor Zora, thanks so much for having me.